Hey, welcome to TSL Live. It's TSL Live today here on May the 4th be with you. So it is for all you Star Wars fans out there. Today is the May 4th. So many amazing things happening with Star Wars. Oh, that's right. Not really all that amazing, the things that are happening with Star Wars right now. Anyway, I won't get into the fact that I was very disappointed about Boba Fett, even though he was supposed to be amazing. I do love the Mandalorian. But anyway, I digress. Let's talk about cameras. News and reviews about cameras here on the Side of Lens. We have, what is the best mirrorless camera out there right now? What is the best mirrorless camera out on the market right now? Let's take a look at lenses and how lenses are never going to be the same. I'm going to talk about why that is. There really is a new generation of lenses coming that's going to just change the market completely. So let's start off with, what is the best mirrorless camera? I think there are so many amazing, well, know what? I digress. I heard today, this is last week, all of the blogs are reporting a new Canon EOS R7 mirrorless camera. This makes perfect sense to me because in the past, this is basically the 7D, which was a DSLR camera, now a mirrorless camera, the R7. Canon has done this in the past. When the 7D came out, it had all the latest autofocus. It had great specs and was a great cinema camera. And that's exactly what this looks like this is going to be. It's got 32 megapixel APS-C, but it is an APS-C sensor. That's what they're reporting. These are all unconfirmed specs, so you can't take all these at face value. But generally speaking, from past experience, this is going to be pretty close. So 20 frames a second. It's got the Digi-X processor, one CFX Express, and one SD card. That drives me crazy when you mix like this. I love Sony where you can use either in the slots because I just hate having two different types of media. I want to stick with a type of media and have a 2-card slot. So that one drives me a little bit crazy. But 4K at 60 frames a second, which is pretty amazing. And 1080p at 240 frames a second, which, yeah, I mean, you can get 120 at least at 2K, which is really nice. But for me, there's a threshold of 4K 120 frames, and that's going to really lend itself to when we have a conversation about what's the best mirrorless camera out there. C-Log 3, latest hot shoe. I'm so thankful that Canon has finally turned the corner about the hot shoe on the cameras. You have the ability to put sound devices on the camera. Tascam makes one that will work on the Canon. We've had one for Sony forever that we've used. It's just been a great way to be able to integrate sound and really lay that sound right back to the clip on the camera. It's been incredible. So I'm glad that Canon is finally heading down that direction. All right, so really it says a combination of ergonomics from the EOS R6 and the R5, which means it's somewhere in between those two. So sometime in August of this year. You know, APS-C sensors are always fascinating to me because I think they really serve the market in the fact that they're less expensive. That's really where they serve the market. And they also serve the market a little bit in the fact that an APS-C sensor is not so different than a Super 35, which means you're really just about every movie you've ever seen has been shot on a Super 35 sensor size. So they really fit right into the ergonomics and to the digital world and to the sensor size of most of the filmmaking that's done. So as a cinema camera, it's going to work really well. Is it going to have stabilization? If it did, that would make this camera pretty amazing, actually. It would make it pretty amazing. So we'll just have to see what happens with that. I know that in the market, I believe that the R6 is the megapixels are too small. It needs to get closer to, and I'm hoping they'll do an R6 II, and the megapixels will become a little closer to what you have with the A7 IV. So somewhere in the 30s. I think they really need to do that with the R6 to make it a little more competitive with Sony and to just keep it in that world there. So anyway, there's a new camera coming. You know, it's interesting because we got all these rumors about the R1 and now crickets. You know, what's going on about the R1? We've remade the R5C, the R5 and the R5C now. They've got the R3 that's come out. And now no word about the R1, at least nothing I've been able to see out there. Maybe there is. If you've heard of something, let us know. Love to hear what you've heard out there, but I have not seen anything for a while. Okay, if we have any questions or comments, Julian's going to jump right in on me here. Are you in there? Are you out there, Julian?
Yep, I'm here, and somebody mentioned that they prefer the A7 IV.
They like the A7 IV?
Yep.
Oh, interesting.
And someone else says Z9 is their favorite.
Z9.
Yeah.
So we got people coming in. So A7 IV is an incredible mirrorless camera. There's no doubt about it. Great autofocus capabilities. It's a 30 plus megapixel sensor. It's just a great market point as far as price goes. It'll be interesting to see if this new camera, the R7, how it compares as far as that spec compared to the R4, because that's going to really A7 IV. Are you talking about the R4? Did you say R4?
A7 IV.
Oh, A7 IV. Okay, thought
Sony
maybe you said
A7
R4 there for a minute. A7
and the
IV.
Nikon
A7 R4
Z9.
gets overlooked a lot in the Sony line because it's a large megapixel sensor, 60 plus megapixels. It's just a lot of great specs with that A7 R4, but it gets overlooked by the A1, which doesn't have as large megapixels as the R4, but has some better video features, 120 frames a second. Yeah, the A1's pretty hard to beat. Anyway, so there's looking at the R7 that's coming, and let's just, let's see what happens with that camera. If you're into APS-C sensors, if you're looking for a less expensive kind of video camera, it's going to be a great place in the market, and Canon's going to jump in with that camera. All right. So who does make the best video camera? Not video camera, mirrorless camera on the market today. Who does? Who makes the best mirrorless camera on the market today? I think it boils down to a very, very small number of cameras. I think the Sony A1 is an incredible camera that comes in at a very competitive spec-wise, not price-wise. I mean, this is a $6,500 camera, not a cheap camera. So the A1, though, it checks all the boxes for me. It's got stabilization. It does 120 frames a second in 4K. It gives you continuous shooting, both in mechanical and in electronic shutter that is just incredible to shoot with. I shot condors with it. Just an incredible camera. The specs are just off the charts, if you ask me. We finally passed the 8-bit 420. Everything is 10-bit 422. But now here comes the R9, the Z9. The Z9 we shot with it. It's had a new firmware update. The Z9 now is a very competitive camera. It has all of the specs that you need. Really is, for me, I think one of the, I don't know, Nikon has been a little slow in the video market, but now is coming on with gangbusters. We really have the ability to shoot. We got 4K up to 120 frames a second. Like I said, we've got stabilization. They do use the dual cards, the C Express Type B card slots, but it has two of them. And at least we're working off the same two cards, which I think makes a lot of sense. Those cards are not cheap. Those cards are, they're an investment, but they're cards that are super fast and are going to give you the performance you can get from that camera. Without those cards, you can't get the performance you need out of that camera. But you can't use any other card anyway. So there you go. Anyway, I just think it's the Z9 has now become a very competitive camera in the marketplace as far as best mirrorless camera. Is it the best mirrorless camera? It's pretty dang close. I compared that to the A1, and I thought it was really super close, head to head. The autofocus capabilities of that camera, both in live view and in stills, is unparalleled. Those two were battling it out. I couldn't see a lot of difference in them, but that was before the firmware update. And so the Z9 has taken a step forward even now, and you're just seeing a little better specs. You have RAW capabilities now with that camera, which is really where people are all wanting this to go. They want RAW record capabilities in their cameras. But now we come to Canon. Is Canon in there? Well, Canon has two cameras, and if those two cameras had a baby, then they would be in this category. Those two cameras are the R5C and the R3. These two cameras, if you combine what they have together, you would have a competitive camera in this mirrorless market. They both have just a couple of things that drop them and make it shy of working in this best mirrorless camera market. The R3 has incredible, it's got stabilization, it's got great codecs, it shoots a RAW. I mean, it's really a great camera, but it's a 24 megapixel camera. Is that right? 24, I think it is. It's like, how can you do this camera in 24 megapixels? Then you got the R5C, which is a much larger megapixel camera. It's a 47 megapixel camera. And is that right? 47 it is. 47 megapixel camera. But now you don't have stabilization. You've got electronic stabilization. It does have raw light, which is really good. So it's interesting how I see a lot of people putting the R3 in the same category as the Z9 and the A1, and I'm going, I'm not so sure that it belongs there as well as the A7 or the R5C does, because the R5C has really some great features that has kind of propelled it in. It's just coming out now. People are getting their hands on it, able to see it and use it, and I think that jumps into that category. It is interesting. If you look at these cameras from a size and ergonomic standpoint, you have the A1, tiny, you got the R5C, fat on the back, you got now the Z9, big, tall, and then you got the R3. So that Z9 and R3 are these big, it's like the 1DX platform. You got that battery on the bottom. It's a tall camera. It's a bigger platform. I'm not so sure how well I will kind of convert over to an R5C with that fat back on the back. I don't know. It'll just be interesting to be able to use it and see how that works. I know the A1 is very small and very, very simple to use, and to carry with you and have in different situations makes that very simple to use. So I don't know. It's very interesting. So who is the best? What is the best mirrorless camera out there? What's your opinion? Any opinions coming in, Jelaine?
Yeah, someone here says the A7 IV has features that the A1 doesn't at half the price, and it could easily be solved with a firmware update.
What could easily be solved with a firmware update, Dave?
It doesn't really specify that, but it's...
So he's saying the A7 IV does have features that the A1 doesn't. It has incredible live action autofocus. It's a great video camera in that way. It's not as large a megapixel, obviously. It's in the 30s, whereas the A1 is in the 50s. It's a very different camera. From a price point standpoint, you are absolutely right. You can buy two of those for the price of the A1. The A1 is a very expensive camera, $6,500. But you got in this category now, that's not so off the mark. The R5C is $4,500. The Z9 is $5,500. And of course, the R3 is $6,000. So that's really fascinating how those prices fall out. And I think what isn't the A7 IV like 1,500, or is it 2,000 or 21? I can't remember the price. It may be 20 in the 20s here. Someone's looking that up. So you're making the argument the A7 IV should be in that category. You know what? For me, it's about three or four things, maybe I should say 3 or 4. Number one is I want a high megapixel full frame sensor. That's just me. That's what I like. That's because I want to be able to shoot images that I can crop in on. If I'm doing wildlife, I want to be able to have great, gorgeous images to make large prints. So I want a full frame, large megapixel sensor. So I'm feeling like these days 50, 45 to 50 is where the market needs to be. And so I think that the A7 IV falls short on that. But then I want stabilization, and stabilization, Canon falls short on that, whereas the Sonys do not. Then I want a 10-bit 422, 120 frames a second, and if you're doing any kind of video work, that 120 frames a second is really useful. If you're doing any kind of ramping, speed ramping, if you're working in that field at all. And unfortunately, the A7 IV doesn't have that 120 frames a second. It has 60 frames a second in 4K. And if I'm recalling this all correctly, talking off the top of my head here. So if I'm wrong, let me know. But so I think it's a very amazing camera. If you were to say by price point, what is the best mirrorless camera out there right now? A7 IV is definitely in that market. I think the R6 falls into that category, but unfortunately the R6 doesn't have the same megapixels. If it did, had a little better megapixel count, I think it would be in the same category as the A7 IV, but it falls a little short with regards to the megapixel count for the sensor.
Right, and that price is $2,400.
$2,400 for the A7 IV. That makes sense. You know what? You can buy two of them and still have some change left over to buy a Tamron lens, which would be amazing, that A7 IV. So, yeah, that's something to consider. We've been considering buying one here at the Slanted Lens. We're in both worlds. We're in Canon and we're in Sony. We have a complete line of lenses in both of those. I've never shot that much Nikon, except really before the whole digital age. I shot Nikon forever on film, but Nikon makes great cameras. The 850 was an incredible camera. The Z9 now has that same great picture, beautiful images. They have great lenses. The lens selection isn't quite as robust when you start getting into the mirrorless. A lot of the companies are trying to catch up on the mirrorless. I don't know what the barrier is and why it is we can't get Z lenses and RF lenses out of these out of Sigma, Tamron. A lot of these companies are just now starting to get lenses into these mirrorless kind of aftermarket lenses for these cameras, and I don't know if the manufacturers have held that up, which is very possible. But anyway, that is what it is. Any other thoughts there, Jolene, on who makes the best camera?
Well, just that same person commented that the A7 IV, they could put the A7 IV features into the A1 with a firmware update.
Yes. Okay. That makes perfect sense. Why does Sony not do that? Why do you not put the features that the A7 IV has into the A1 with a firmware update? I would love to see that. There's a couple of features there. The live action autofocus is one of them. It would just make a huge difference on the A1. I don't know. Sometimes and it's the same with what's coming up here with the R7. When the D7 came out, or 7D came out, it was like it's got better autofocus than the 5D Mark III. It was pretty interesting. And sometimes these smaller cameras, they put a feature in there to make them attractive and to sell them, and they sell a lot of cameras in that category. Because when you can get a pretty decent camera right now in a price point that's around $2,000, you've got a pretty good camera set up there. So I think that may be their thinking. I don't know. All right, so if I had to say what was the best mirrorless camera out there, I think the A1 and the R9 are pretty head-to-head there. I think
Z9, you mean?
I mean, sorry, what did I say?
A1.
A1 and the Z9. There we go. A1 and the Z9 are very close, very head-to-head right now. I think the Z9 may be kind of edging it out a little bit, but the large body is a little bit of a concern for me as far as hauling it and using it. But spec wise, I think it's really Nikon has come to the party full force. It really has. So pretty amazing, I think, and it's pretty exciting to see as we move forward in this probably in the market right now. All right, that's it. No one else has an argument on why Canon is one of the best mirrorless cameras out there. Crickets. Yeah, well, maybe there isn't an argument. I don't know. I think Canon just keeps splitting their stuff up, and I don't understand it. I really don't. It's hard for me to understand. I love Canon. I love the Canon color. I find it extremely just easy to use, and yet just can't get all the features in one place, and that's been difficult. So anyway, all right, let's move on here. Okay, we do have a product here I want to talk about really quickly, unless there's anything else on that mirrorless camera, Jolene.
That's it for now.
Okay. Delkin devices. The first time I got a Delkin card, I was in Yellowstone and we were shooting, and I had left one of my card clamshells back home, and I did not have enough cards. So we ran into this little camera store in Yellowstone, Montana, and I said, "Hey, do you have 126 megabyte cards?" And he said, "Yeah, I got Delkin cards." I'm going, "Really? Delkin cards?" I mean, I knew of Delkin. I talked to the Delkin people. I've seen their stuff. They're not tough cards. That's Sony. I saw their, I can't remember what they were called, but they're like bulletproof, made to, be stomped on, ran through the mud, ran over all cards. They've been making these kinds of really high-end, heavy-duty cards for a while. People kind of view Delkin as kind of not making this kind of high-end card, but they have done for a long time. So we bought 4, or I think 2 or 3 of these power cards when we were in Yellowstone. And we've had them now for several years since then. And they've worked flawlessly. We've had no problems with them whatsoever. So Delkin, when they reached out to us, said, "Hey, we got these cards. This is not a sponsorship. They just sent one of these to me. I just thought these are really interesting. This is Delkin now. This is a CF Express Type B memory card. This is for the Z9. This is meant for the Z9. It comes in several different sizes. They've got 75 gigabytes, which is a little small if you're going to run that camera. I think you start getting into that 325 makes sense. The 512 gigabytes makes sense. 650 gigabytes makes sense. But these are large cards, and they're not inexpensive cards, but the Delkin is a really good price point for these kinds of cards. They are really in the same category as like tough type cards by Sony. They're meant to be extreme weather. You're going to get them hot. You can get them cold. You can really be as destructive as you need to be. I mean, no one needs to be, but I mean, cards sometimes drop, fall. I know people complain and say, no, that you don't have to worry about your SD cards. I worry about them all the time because I've had them fail on me and have them, the little things break off from the SD cards, which the Delkin SD cards don't have that. Like the tough cards, they have that smooth input. They have the smooth kind of interface, so you don't have those little pieces of plastic on there. Anyway, so great new device. This is a USB 3.2, and it supports all CF Express Type B SD memory cards. So a great setup here from Delkin. If you're interested in taking a look at that, it's worthwhile. I think these are amazing. These are that same card. These are those, not the power cards. These are the step up from the power. These are the black cards, 128 gigabytes. They also make 256, and we just started to use these because they were a good price point, and we ran into them in Yellowstone that one time. All right, so it's moving on here. Okay. Lenses. I think lenses are turning a corner, and we're going to see lenses will never be the same again. I really, truly believe that. I believe lenses are going to become more and more electronic, less and less large, and more in form factor fitting with mirrorless cameras. The 28 to 75 from Tamron, the new 24 to 70 that's coming out from Sony are much lighter weight. They're made to match the form factor of that mirrorless camera. On the thing that's amazing about the Tamrons, and I think we're going to see this with camera manufacturers in the future, is that this is completely programmable. You can plug this in, you can change the direction of the focus, you can change which ring does what. I mean, it just gives you complete control of how this lens works, which really I think is the future of lenses. The ability to control exactly how you want your lens to work. And me, because I focus so long on Canon lenses, I'm just used to that focus direction, and it throws me off when I go the other way. So I can change mine to be able to focus if I'm hand focusing for video, to focus the same as Canon lenses. So that really is the future. That's streamlined. It doesn't have all the knobs on it. You don't have an autofocus on here, on and off. You do that inside the camera menu, which is very seamless. Now, the new one from Sony, the 2470, it is interesting, 28 to 75, 2470. The reason I like a 28 to 75 is I love the fact that this starts to push into a portrait type lens at 75. I'm getting more into that world where the bokeh builds a little better in the background, and that 2.8 gives me just a nice bokeh. It also is a little bit longer, so becomes a little more of a portrait lens. 2470 is very standard. People have done that forever. I have a Canon 2470. I've got the 28 to 75 from Sony, and there's just a little different way to work, but very similar. It's interesting though, the new Sony full frame, it is $2,298. That's a pretty big price point, but it is also streamlined. It's thinned out. It's not as heavy. You do still have the Aputure ring. You do have the on and off for the manual autofocus, manual focus on the lens, but it is much lighter weight. It's become more ergonomically in keeping with that mirrorless camera platform. And so I think that in and of itself is going to make this lens really popular for Sony users, rather than having those great big lenses that we've had in the past. They're becoming much more streamlined. The one thing about the Tamron is it has a focusing distance of 7.1 inches. The new one from Sony is 8.3. It's just that now it starts to give you a macro capabilities with that lens, which makes it really useful, because if you're doing any kind of work where you're shooting weddings or what have you, it gives you the ability to get in and get some tighter shots with that camera, especially if you go to 75 millimeter. And that with that lens, that gets you in tighter for doing macro type shots. You want to get a ring shot, you want to get a cake shot, what have you, and not have to change out to a macro lens. So, all right, so I think the future of lenses is going to become smaller, lighter weight, less features on the lens itself, but completely programmable. You'll be able to change the lens and do so many different things with them. And that's going to open up a lot of different options when it comes to shooting stills versus video. It's going to give you a lot of different options. And I think that is the future for lenses. I think lenses are going to follow that direction.
So isn't that the situation with the Tamron lens, that you can change how you turn the rings, so you can make...
Yeah, we were just saying that you can plug this in and you can change the direction of the focus. You can change which ring does focus and which does, you can change whatever you want with this lens. It's got a little adapter here, APS-C adapter, and you plug it in, and you now have, there's a program, an app that Tamron makes, and it gives you the ability to go in now and to customize the lens. It's got the button on the front, which you can customize. Gives you a lot of different options.
So what would be, in your mind, the reason to pay $1,400 more for the Sony?
What would be my reason for paying $1,400 more for Sony? Honestly, I use Tamron, so I have to, that's a disclaimer. That's where I'm at. They are sharp. They, autofocus wise, they work flawlessly, especially on that Sony. That Sony interaction is incredible. So I don't see a great reason to spend that money. I mean, we're talking a difference of $900 for the Tamron versus $2,300 for the Sony. I mean, the Sony is probably going to have a stronger build, and that, I think you'll probably see that as the one factor, that it has a stronger build. I've used Tamron lenses now for 10 years, and I had one time that we had to send one in. No, we've had a couple we've had to send in repair, but it's been user error. I had one on a tripod once, and I didn't have it very secured in the back, and it slipped off the tripod mount as I threw the tripod over my shoulder, and it went straight onto the lens, onto the ground, and it cracked the housing of the lens, but it fell straight on it. So that the build is going to be stronger on the Sony, but the Tamron build is definitely robust, and we've never had any issues with them. So I don't know. I have not shot these two edge to edge, image to image, looking through these two lenses to see exactly, but I think you have a hard time making an argument on why you would spend $2,300 when you have an incredible lens from Tamron that's going to be $900. It just makes it so you can get into so many different lenses.
Is that the filter size on the front? Does that make a difference? The 82 compared to is it 67 for Tamron?
All of Tamron lenses in the Sony line are 67 millimeters, whereas it's 82 for the Sony. But you know what? That's a matter of, you can make an argument that, well, I maybe have 82 and that's a better, but I've adapted everything to 67. One ring drops everything that I have. I buy most of my stuff in 82, and then I'll adapt it down to whatever I have below that, because I have lenses that are 77, 67. So it just makes it so you can adapt it down with rings. It's not a hard thing to do at all. My Nisi filter box that we use all the time, I adapt that down to either 82, from 82 to 77 to 67. Just gives you all those different options. So, there are different elements. There's 11 circular there's 11 versus 9. So some may make an argument that the bokeh looks different or better on the Sony. That'd be something to look at, but I would guess that you're not going to find that as significant as you might think. It is interesting to me, and I think you get what you can afford and get into the market, and then start to shoot and make images. We can talk about quality all day and quantity and all those kinds of things, and the reality is the Tamron is going to give you every bit as much as the Sony is, and if you can make great images, what you have to say is going to mean a lot more than how round is the bokeh or what have you. So, but I think, I just don't see a lot of reasons. Am I dancing around that question a little bit? No, I guess I'm not. I don't see a lot of reasons to buy the Sony. I think Tamron gives you an incredible lens at a great price, and it makes it so now you can also buy a couple other lenses and still be in the same price as one. So,
yeah, it makes sense to me.
All right. Any other questions there, Jolene?
That's it.
All right. Tamron is rumored to announce a new 17 to 28 VXD G2 lens. So it's a rework of one of the lenses for the APS-C sensor. They've made some great lenses that work with that A6600 series, A6000 series. And those lenses really, if you're in that world, small, compact lenses that work on the A6000 series, A6600, that whole series. So great lenses to be able to bring into that world. And so they're reworking. They're already started on their second generation of all these lenses. This is the second generation of the 2875, and we'll see more of those second generations come out here real soon. So. All right. I wish Tamron would make a 50 millimeter 1.2 on Sony. Oh, that'd be so wonderful. Anyway, love that thought. 50 millimeter. I hated 50 millimeters for the longest time. I don't know why. It just seemed like, oh, well, that's just an average kind of thing. But you know what? A good 50 millimeter 1.2 or 1.4 just as a great lens, because I shoot all my landscapes with it. I stitch them together, which is easy to do, and it gives you that flat perspective that looks wonderful. They're also great for portraits because you can get in tight. You can drop the background out of focus so easily with that 1.2 or 1.4. So I don't know. I love a good 50 millimeter lens. It's a great lens to have. All right.
Okay, my 12-year-old kid wants to start photography. What's a good starter mirrorless camera?
Oh, starter mirrorless. That's tough. I would tell you that rather than a mirrorless, I would get them into a Rebel, like a 7 Ti. You know, that's a great little camera to learn how to use the camera settings and to be able to do some video. If they want to do a little video, it's inexpensive. Or buy a used, any one of the T series. You can get a T4, a used Rebel is a great beginning camera for anyone who wants to get into photography. You're not going to spend a lot of money on it. You know, you can get into something for $400 or $500 with a kit lens is a great way to get started. Actually, if you jumped into a 24, like the 28-75 on a 28-75 on a Rebel, the lens is way bigger than the camera. That would be a great setup. But really, for a beginning person, a Rebel, like a T7i, a T6i, I mean, one of the older cameras, you could buy it used with a kit lens, is a great starting point. If you want to get into a mirrorless camera, then really cost-wise, there's only a couple of entry points that make sense if you want to stay into a lens system and direction. And when I say that, I mean, you want to get into Canon, you want to get into Sony, you want to get into Nikon. If you want to jump into a great Fuji and an APS-C sensor, there are some inexpensive entry point cameras there that make a lot of sense. But I just think you probably want to jump into a line of cameras with lenses that you can stay with. And if that is, I think Canon's a great way to go. You can get into the A6000 series. A6000 is a great camera. A6600 is a great camera. Those, if I'd say mirrorless wise for a beginning person, are probably a great place to start, but much more expensive than what you're going to have if you get into a Rebel T7i. I think it's a pretty great place to start. So that's my suggestion.
Okay, a couple of people coming late to the party wondering what you concluded as the best mirrorless camera. So if
coming late to the party, want to know what the best mirrorless camera is, eh?
And if you weren't shackled with lenses in either system, would you choose the Canon R3 or Nikon Z9 if you had access to both but could only purchase one?
If I had to choose between the Nikon Z9 and the R3 and I had access to all the lenses on both, I would absolutely take the Z9. There's no question about it. That camera is spectacular. I think the R3 is a great camera. I just think it falls short as far as megapixel size. I think the Z9 checks every box. It really does. And if I had a line of lenses, Nikon lenses, I would go with the Z9. I read one person left a comment on our blog, a comment on our YouTube channel about the comparison we did with the Z9 and the A1. And he said, you know what? I thought the D850 was the end-all be-all of all cameras. I'd never buy another camera. He goes, now I have the Z9. He said, now I feel like that's the end-all be-all of all cameras. I think we're starting to max out a little bit in that. You know, it's like, where do we go from here? Where do we go in the mirrorless world that is going to be significant? What is it they're going to do next that's going to make this so that we feel compelled? Because that's what they're all trying to do. They're trying to come up with something that will make us feel compelled to buy the next generation. Well, it has to be something with autofocus. It has to be some way to just break a barrier with autofocus where, I don't know, you look, that's been a thing for a long time. Wherever you're looking is where it focuses. That's been a thing they've tried before. Anyway, I'm just wondering, we've hit such a high threshold here. It's kind of like muscle cars back in the 70s. You know, how much faster can we go? And how much faster do we need to go? I think the Z9 has set a pretty high bar for all of that. So if I had the choice between the two, Z9, R3, I would definitely do the Z9. It's a great camera.
Okay, here's another question. I have a Sony a6600 with Sigma primes and a Sony a7 III with FE primes. I'm thinking about selling my a7 III because I find myself using the 6600 more, especially with tracking. Is that a bad decision?
The a7 III?
I'm thinking about selling my A7 III.
Yeah, you know what? The A7 III was a great camera. It really depends on what you like to do. If you're saying because of tracking, I would probably sell my A7 III and buy an A7 IV. I just love full frame sensors, and I love the just the way the bokeh falls in the background, the focus falls out for video. I just think they really are a great sensor size if you really want excellent looking video on a mirrorless camera. So that would be my suggestion. But if you find the form factor in that A6600, it really works for you, it's a great camera. It really is. And maybe it's the size and the weight. But if you say tracking is working for you on that A6600, you're going to find the same or better tracking on the A7 IV. So I'd probably sell the A7 III and I'd buy an A7 IV. If you have the lenses, that's the direction I would go.
Okay, here's another. I was thinking to go Sony, but I have Nikon lenses. Do you think the Z9 is better than switching to any Sony?
Wow, if you have all Nikon lenses, and you're going to try to make a decision to set all that aside and go with Sony, that's a big jump. I would look at the Z9 really seriously, because I think it's a strong camera. I think it's head-to-head with the A1. Right now, the two cameras that really stand out in the Sony line for me is the A1 and the A7 IV. I mean, those two cameras are the cameras that really are standing out. And, you know, I don't know about selling all your Nikon glass and getting into that new market. I would look at the Z9 very, very closely. It's a whole new learning curve to jump into Sony. The menus, the way it works, you know, it's taken me a year or so to really get to where I feel comfortable with Sony, and I'm pretty fast with it now. So that, you know, I'm not as fast with Nikon. I don't use it that often, and so I'm just not as good with it. So I would suggest you look at the Z9 really seriously before you sell and jump.
Okay, and
it's a beautiful picture of the Z9. Canon makes great imagery. I mean, it just really make great pictures. So I'd think about that seriously before I changed.
And a question off cameras. How do you feel about diffusion filters?
How do I feel about diffusion filters? Hello, is it the 90s calling? I use so many diffusion. Oh, sorry. I used so many diffusion filters in the 90s. The Pro Mist, the Black Mist, the Pearl Mist. I mean, we used them all the time. The goal was to make things look soft. You know, I think it's a great look. I know people who just put, especially, we just did an interview with tell me her name, Jolene. Does the rock and roll, travels with rock and roll bands.
Yasi.
She was amazing. She said she uses a Pro Mist on her cameras. If I recall, I'm just off the top of my head here. Just all the time, because it just gives a little bit of a soft, kind of interesting feeling. She doesn't use it all the time, but she puts it on often. So she's using that just to kind of soften things out. So I think you want to be really careful with it because it's baked in. I would use it and play with it and just see what your threshold is with using diffusion filters, because it is baked into the imagery at that point. If you don't use it, you can try to do some softening in Photoshop. I don't think it looks as good. I think it looks much better in the camera. I think there's a really interesting look there, and I think people are going to find that. I think we're going to see more and more of it. We're coming back to that. Of course, the 90s are back in right now, so that kind of look is back in. How long that'll last, I don't know. But we go to this hyper sharp, you know, because we have huge megapixel cameras with large files and super sharp images. I mean, look at the stuff from like the A1, the Z9, you know, the R5. I mean, they're just super sharp. So I think everyone's going, okay, we've seen that now, you know, and this little softer. I mean, a lot of people don't look good. Hasselblad used to have a softening in camera because their lenses were so sharp that when you shoot a person, every single blemish, everything was just too much. So they would soften it out a little bit. And that just, I think we're seeing that now, that a little bit of softening when you're shooting people actually looks really nice, looks very good. I think if I was doing portraits and wedding, those kinds of things, I'd consider shooting with some kind of a diffusion on the camera, a light diffusion, just to give it a little bit of a dreamy look. Not too much, not too heavy. You know, I wouldn't do the, you know, the glamour shots at the mall look, but I would certainly soften it out just a little bit. So.
Okay, no more questions then. So let's move on to this Apple self-service repair program.
Apple self-service repair program. Who in the world thought Apple would really let you fix your own stuff? Are you kidding me? Well, they said they were going to. They opened up a self-repair service so that people would have access. I think they're just getting pushed into it by, public opinion, trying to get pushed to say, let us have access to fix our stuff. So they opened up an Apple repair service. Almost immediately, those people who have tried to use it, reports are, it is so complicated, and the tool sets you have to have are so large, and it just becomes completely just impossible to do. And I think Apple's made it that way. They don't want you to repair your own stuff. They don't want that to become a thing. I think their whole kind of direct approach to this has been closed systems. They want complete control. They want you. And you know what? For some people, they hate that. My son hates it because he wants to be able to work on the system and change the system and adapt and do what he wants to it. For me, I don't want to think about it. I want my phone to talk to my computer, to talk to my this, to talk to that. I don't want to think about it. I don't want to spend time on that because it's not my thing. So Apple's not going to open that up very easily, and they didn't. It didn't work out very well. It wasn't a real successful experience. So anyway, there you go, Apple. Hey, I'm going to just throw this in here really fast. On my keychain, on all of my keychains, I have this thing called a Thinguma. I think it's called a Thinguma. Jillian said a Thinguma.
Thinguma.
Thingaguma. That's right. Thingaguma. Thingaguma. Jillian said it's a Thinguma. Thingaguma. Thingaguma. It's a Thingaguma. All right. Anyway, there we go. That's the weirdest name ever.
It's a tool.
It's a tool that allows you to tighten the plate on your camera. It's got a hex size to be able to tighten the really common hex nuts that are used. I love this thing. This is not a sponsorship. I don't even know who these people are. I bought it on B&H, loved it. And that's a little photo tip of the day. One of these things on your keychain, I have them on every keychain. So it doesn't matter what keychain I pick up. I can tighten a plate really quickly. I can adjust a hex set, and it's just a great little device. So there's my photo tip of the day. Just how many times have you tried to do it with, who has a quarter in their pocket anymore? Used to be I always had a quarter in my pocket. All right, I'll tighten this plate. I never have a quarter in my pocket anymore, or you're doing your keys. You're trying to make your keys work. The other day, one of my students was trying to tighten the plate on their camera with their SD card. I'm going, what are you doing? That's an SD card. It's not a wrench. It's not a screwdriver. I'm going, don't do that. You're going to ruin your SD card. I'm going, man alive. So I think this is pretty cool. The Thinguma. All right, Thinguma people. There you go. Free advertising just because I think it worked out cool.
Okay, here's a few more comments about cameras.
Oh, comments about cameras. Imagine that.
What would be the best mirrorless camera for video, in your opinion?
Oh, for video. Well, I think the R4 and the A1 really are up there on the Z9 for video. They really are.
What about the R6?
The R6 is a great camera for video. You know what? I'd have to look at those things a little more closely. I think the A7, all these numbers. I think the R5C is going to be much stronger in the market than we think. With that fan on the back, it's got a great sensor size, beautiful picture. So I think the R5C, unfortunately got swept under the wave of the fact that it had overheating problems when the R5 came out. I think the R5C is now unfortunately going to have to overcome that kind of stigma that came along with it. People in the news cycle, they just move on to what's new. What's new is the Z9 right now. What's new in the Canon line? The R5C doesn't seem to be getting the kind of exposure. I mean, we're back on the R6. The R6 is not going to be as good as a cinema camera as the R5C for video. The R5C is going to be much better. But both of those cameras do not have stabilization, and that's why I kind of lean towards the A1 and the A7 IV. That stabilization, people are shooting handheld a lot, and that makes a huge difference. I know the electronic stabilization is pretty good and looks pretty good. I need to do a test of that and just show some different examples of those two head-to-head. The Z9 with stabilization versus the R5C with electronic stabilization. Love to see the difference in those as you hand hold them. But there's my sense about it. I think you can get into several of those cameras, the Z9, the A1, the A7 IV. I think you get great video with any of those cameras. A lot of people are using the R6 and the R5 and having great results with it. So these cameras, anytime you get a camera, a video camera that has a 10-bit 422 codec, and if you have a raw recording, you're really professional high-end video world. That's the world you're living in at that point.
Okay, here's another question. Is the Sony FX3 good enough for taking real estate photos? I plan on using it with the Tamron 17 to 28.
So the Sony FX, so we're talking about video application here?
Real estate photos, sounds like still images.
Yeah, FX3. I don't know. I would step up to something has a little wider. No, sorry. I would step up to something that has just the larger megapixels on a sensor. I think the A7 IV is still in a great category there. You can get a great lens for that, and it's going to help us. You know, I think this is going to work much better for you. So that's my thought.
Okay, here's someone's comment about Sony versus Nikon. He tried the Sony A1 and the Nikon Z9 cameras, and the ergonomics and menu systems, plus the battery life on the Sony wasn't as good as the Nikon Z9.
Those are great points. When you say ergonomics, I don't have any trouble with the ergonomics of the Sony. It works great for me, but the battery life is a bit of an issue. Although I've shot, well, not as much video on the A1 as I have stills. I've shot for hours and hours and thousands of images with a battery doing stills on the A1. But you can't compete with that larger battery pack that the Z9 comes with. I mean, it just makes it much easier. It is a very steady, a solid camera. It's made like Nikon makes cameras. That camera will last forever. It really will.
Okay. Okay, that's it for now.
Okay, so let's moving on here. I thought this was really interesting, and kind of because I have a little bit of perspective about it, but DJI halts shipments to Russia and the Ukraine of their drones to prevent weaponizing their drones. It's fascinating to me because I have a relative who works in an area of the government that makes drones. And so he said, you know what, we get complaints all the time saying, why do our drones cost so much money? And yet we go out in the field and we see people just strapping a piece of ordnance to a $1,200 drone and flying it in. They're disposable. Yet we're paying thousands of dollars, you know, to get a drone. So it is interesting. People are weaponizing these things. I mean, it's just a delivery platform at that point. It's a one-way trip. So it is fascinating to me that they would stop supplying that area, because I think it's a very real, you know, the learning curve on getting the DJI up, you know, is a matter of, you know, not very long. And the distance you can fly them, you don't have to get as close as you think you can. So I think that's a really good move by DJI, and especially just to take them out. They say they're not going to give them to the Ukraine or to Russia because they're trying to be fair-minded to both. So that is what it is. I won't make any political statements about that. But yeah, I think it's kind of an interesting thought that you are weaponizing drones. Drones are a delivery platform, and doesn't surprise me at all if that's an issue.
Okay, no comments on that.
Okay. If you are into video lighting and you do video lighting at all, it's been a standard in that world forever. An M18 is an HMI. You can plug it into a 20 amp circuit. It gives you a strong light on set. You can use it through a window during the daytime. It'll give you some kind of a highlight through a window during the daytime. Does it compete with the sun completely? Not completely, but it's a pretty strong competitor without having to now get into having to have generators and all kinds of stuff, like a huge crew of people to be able to run an HMI that really like a 4 or 5K or something. That's just crazy. M18 was a great standard, has been a great standard for years and years in the video industry. So it's fascinating to me when I see Aputure, and I am a huge fan of Aputure lights. We've used their lights from the beginning. They are an affordable, yet really an industry directed company. They are making industry lighting for people who are in the video world, in the film world. They are making lights that you can use on set, but at an affordable rate. You know, they're not $4,000 and $5,000. They're a much more entry level kinds of prices. We have Aputure lights we've used for years and years. Everything from the 120s to the 122, 120 D2s to the 300s to the 300 D2. I mean, we've used all of their lights. I feel like their new 600 is not at the M18 level yet, but their 1200 is going to be. You're going to finally have an affordable LED that's around $2,000 that allows you to, that's going to give you the power of an M18. And on a truck, that's an incredible light to use. It gives you a nice highlight through the window, like I said. You can bounce that into a shiny board through the window. I mean, there's a lot of different things you can do with that light that make it really usable on set. So I think we're going to finally see LEDs are going to become affordable enough for the average person. When I say average person, you know, the person who are doing run and gun video, any kind of music video, any kinds of corporate video, any kinds of those things. They're not doing high-end film. That 1200 from Aputure is really going to be a great entry point. It's going to allow you to have a light that is really powerful that you can use on set, and I'm excited about it. I think it's going to be a great light. I hope that Aputure will get us one so we can test it and talk about it, because I think, as lighting is my thing, I think that is going to be an LED that really makes sense on a truck and with a production crew. So there you go. There's a little thought about LEDs. It's fascinating. The reason I've loved Aputures for so long is just because they all come with a Bowens mount. It's just such a simple concept that you can now modify that Bowens mount. You can put a 7-inch reflector on it. You can put a softbox on it with a Bowens mount, a speed ring. You can, you can put any kind of a LECO goes on that, which gives you the ability to focus the spot. All those kinds of things. Aputure has made those devices to give you those options. And I think it just all comes off from that Bowens mount, which is really fascinating. It's more the way I worked in still photography, modifying a single light to do many different things on set. And I think the Aputure lights have always achieved that same goal, modifying a single light to do several different things. In the future, I know they have the 600 bicolor. I think the 1200 is, I'm not positive here. I'm talking a little off the top of my head. I think the 1200 is just going to be a straight daylight in the beginning. It's hard when you go to daylight, and when you go to a bicolor, you're having to change that LED in there, and sometimes they're not as powerful. So, all right, so a little thought about Aputure. Great lighting company. Looking forward to see what they have coming out. All right, I'm wrapping this up here. Oh, you know what? Any questions before I wrap it up here, Jolene?
No. Someone was just wondering if Aputure was paying us, and I responded no.
No, Aputure's not paying us. Aputure's not paying us at all. No, okay. Not at all. It's very easy to look at lighting in the industry, and there's several out there that just make sense for kind of this run and gun guerrilla type filmmaking people. I think Aputure is by far the lead company there, not paying us at all. I do think there's some others. Intelitech makes great lights, light panels, they make great lights as well. There's several out there, but I think Aputure just matches the way I work with regards to that Bowens mount and putting soft boxes and things on there, and that's why I'm a big fan. But they're not paying us at all. Okay, wrapping this up here. I just want to make sure everyone, we talked about it last week. Right now, the Platypod Extreme has a Kickstarter campaign, and it's up right now. You can go to platypod.com. You can go over to their Kickstarter. You can see all the stuff in the show notes. The difference between this and, say, the Platypod Max is that these little keys here are attached. So you can keep these, you can deploy them or not deploy them, depending on if you want. It's really quick to do. Just drop these into place. You can put the spikes down if it's on a rocky surface. You can put the little rubber pad down if it's on a car. It's just quick to deploy this thing, and that's really what they're wanting to do. It allows you to put the straps on, so you can drop this into a strap that's already around a tree or something. Better places to put screws that really work better with the screws. So a lot of different options with that Platypod Extreme. So the Kickstarter is going on right now. It's worth getting involved and getting one of these. I think it's an easy platform, lighter weight, easy to carry with you, great places to attach things. So excellent way to go. I mean, the way this is set up, you can either put the strap in here to slip it on, or you can put the strap through the hole, so you have both those options if you're concerned about that. Easy to carry. I think Platypods are excellent. We use them all the time because right now I have 4 of them deployed over at SKB with different time-lapse cameras on a machine they're building. It's just an easy platform to get up with either screws into the wall or a stud or something, or a strap on a pole, which is both. I have both those going at SKB right now. And it's just a great platform. So check out the Platypod Extreme, get over to their Kickstarter, and just check one of those out. All right, I don't have anything else. That's it for the day. I hope you found this enjoyable, educational, and way too long, I'm sure. So everybody have a great week and keep those cameras rolling and keep on clicking.